Chelsea LaValle. You can come back again and again and again. Thank you. Wow. So this month we're beginning our exploration of the archetype of the altruist. And that is about selflessness, the concern for the welfare of others, and it comes from the Latin word alteri, which means other people. So the altruist or the humanitarian archetype seeks to improve the happiness and welfare of others through acts of generosity, service, and caring. It is about being an agent of good. I think many spiritual organizations attract the humanitarian. How many of you here would feel like that's a strong archetypal pattern in your life? And the truth is that spiritual organizations, volunteer organizations, need that energy, because otherwise we'd have to like quadruple our budget to do some of the things that we do. We create opportunities for sacred service in order for us to come together. So as we move into these experiences, I do invite you to sign up with a home group, because we're going to be exploring these in more depth and in more detail. And we're using the book, The Hero's Journey, isn't it? The Hero Within by Carol Pearson. Thank you. So I wanted to say a little bit about volunteerism, because it is part of religious organizations. And Wikipedia says this, that many studies have observed the effects of volunteerism on happiness and health, and have consistently found a strong connection between volunteerism and current and future health and well-being. In a study of older adults, those who volunteered were significantly higher on life satisfaction and will to live, and significantly lower in depression, anxiety, and here's an interesting word, somatization. Volunteerism and helping behavior have not only been shown to improve mental health, but physical health and longevity as well. So if you're feeling down in the dumps, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling like, what's the point, then sounds like one needs to step forward and be an agent of good. And believe me, I know that sometimes when one is feeling like, I can't do another thing, I know that when I step out and then when I give of myself in an act of service, it's like it just shifts. It's the old spiritual principle, right, of give and you will receive. If you need friends, you need to be a friend. If you need money, you give money. If you need energy and you need a purpose for living, then it's about giving through sacred service. And as Chelsea just sang, if we had to take a prayer and say, okay, this is the altruistic prayer, it would be the prayer of St. Francis, wouldn't it? Make me an instrument of peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, let me sow pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, let me sow hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. So we see within this prayer this whole concept, this whole idea of being a humanitarian, and it's what St. Francis gave his life to. When I was in Italy last summer, I got to go to the church where he had his epiphany. St. Francis was very wealthy when he was young, and he was supposed to go into his father's business, and then he went off onto the Crusades, and he came back a changed man. He was almost had a nervous breakdown from going off into these Crusades. And when he came back, he was looking for meaning in his life, and he found it by creating this ministry of service. And within this church that he built, was the Order of the Poor Clares. Anybody heard of the Poor Clares? So Clare was, who knows who she was? She was a friend of his. You know, if you watch the old movie Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, I guess she was an old girlfriend, but you know. But she started an order called the Poor Clares, and the Clares are devoted to poverty, of course, but they're also devoted to prayer, and they're still in existence today. There are Poor Clare convents and communities around the world, and their tagline is "Surrounding the Planet in Prayer," something like that. But so we see this altruism, we see this humanity, we see this giving, but we also always need to look at the downside or the shadow side of it as well, right? And sometimes the shadow side of altruism can be martyrism, right? And I saw that with Claire because I walked through the church where she lived and, of course, read a lot about her life. And, James Tierney and Gail Macy are teaching a class right now on medieval women, and one of the people they're studying is Claire. And she was sick an awful lot. I mean, I couldn't believe how many years this woman was sick, and yet she would continue to do her prayers, and, she would continue to do that. But it can be a downside of altruism and altruistic behavior is that you give, and then it's like, forget it, I'm out of gas. The same article that I read to you about volunteerism says that, yes, there's these wonderful benefits. However, if you overgive, it has the opposite effect. So it's a balance that we need to walk when we are entering into this archetypal pattern. I love the story of Elisha and the widow's oil because I think the antidote to martyrism or giving too much is being willing to receive. So one of my questions to you this morning is not only how good a giver are you, not only how good a server are you, but how good a receiver are you? Are you able to receive compliments? Are you able to receive gifts? Are you able to receive that which is given to you? In the story of Elijah in the widow's oil, she was broke. She had nothing, and she went to Elijah, whose husband, who was dead, used to work for him, and she's like, hey, you need to help me out here. And he said, well, what have you got? And she said, I don't have anything. And he goes, no, what do you got? She goes, well, I have like one jug of oil, and that's it. And he's like, all right, go to your neighbors, borrow every jug that you can find, close the door with your sons, and start pouring the oil. And many of you know the story. She pours the oil, it fills up the jug, it fills up, then she pours the next one, and she keeps going until she runs out of containers to fill up, and then the oil stops pouring from this, magic jug, whatever it is. But symbolically, it symbolizes this idea of if we are wanting to receive or needing to receive because we've overgiven, then we might have to ask for help. And how much we are willing to receive is how big our containers are. And the fact that she went to her neighbors to borrow, I think is symbolic of saying, you know what, I need some help here. I need to receive. So sit with that as we explore this archetypal pattern this month, because there's two sides of a coin. One is the giving, one is the receiving. Now, I told you that I like to astrologically match these up, so I've chosen this one to go with Pisces, because March is Pisces, it's also a little bit of February. And I see a lot of the qualities of the humanitarian in the Pisces. They're compassionate and kind. It rules intuition and sympathy. Just really kind of feeling what everybody's feeling and really wanting to help and really wanting to serve. That's part of that energy. And again, the downside is there could be like little boundaries and not really stopping and taking care of oneself. So I want to build a case for altruism. And Jesus was, I'm noticing Jesus is showing up as like everything. So far we've done the ruler and the rebel, and he's kind of showed up as both. He's also obviously showed up as the altruist. And the scripture that I want to lean on is after he resurrects, he is talking to the disciples and visiting them. And he's with Peter. And he says to Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I do. And he says, well, feed my lambs. And then Jesus says again, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I do. And he says, well, tend my sheep. And then he says again, Peter, do you love me? And Peter's like, yes, Lord, I love you. And he says, well, then feed my sheep. I think what's happening here is a couple of things. One is that Peter denied Jesus 3 times in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before he was resurrected, and he's giving Peter a chance to repair that relationship, to repair that betrayal. And so he asked him 3 times because Peter, remember when they came to get Jesus, and that when the soldiers came to get Jesus, and people are saying, does anybody know him? And Peter's like, I don't know, I never saw this guy before. And he says it not once, but 3 times. So there's that repairing that happens. But he also is saying, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, tend my sheep. In other words, you have to serve, you have to take care. Charles Fillmore said it this way, our co-founder of Unity. He said, 3 times Jesus asked Simon Peter, do you love me? And Peter's spiritual advancement hinged on his possession of love and the test of love in its willingness to serve. It is quite evident that Jesus was trying to teach Peter that if he loved, truly he would serve. So the message here is that as we love, we also serve. We need to follow it up, if you will, with action. So one of the ways that we make love visible is through our service to one another. Now, here's the thing. The service that he's talking about is selfless service, right? One of the things that he said is love your neighbor as yourself. So when I am serving you, who am I serving? Myself, and I'm serving God, right? Because we're all one. We all have the Spirit of the divine within us. So as I am serving, as I am loving, I'm loving myself. I am loving God. And so he's really pushing and demonstrating this over and over again, particularly in the last days of his life and after he returns. So when I serve you, I'm serving God. When I love you, I am loving myself. That's what he's saying. So when we think about famous altruists, I mean, probably who comes to mind rather quickly is St. Francis, who we already talked about, the Poor Clares, Mother Teresa, she's quite an altruist, right? Martin Luther King, Gandhi. I mean, they gave themselves over to a higher cause and a higher purpose, and in many cases it cost them their lives. And so we celebrate and we honor extreme altruists, but what about ordinary people? What about you and I? You know, how do we show up in this form? I think that ordinary people do extraordinary things in extraordinary circumstances. So, you know, there was a shooting in Kalamazoo, Michigan, a couple of weeks ago, and one woman by the name of Tiana Carruthers, she was at the park with her kid, and she was taking care of some other kids in the neighborhood, and this guy pulled up, and he just said, like mumbling, like he was looking for somebody. So she walked up to him, and he pulled out a gun and shot her, and she, rather than run, she blocked his sight, and she turned around to the kids and she told them all to run. She said, run. And then he shot her like another couple, 3 times. But there in that moment, she was also a warrior, but she was an altruist as well. She was willing to give herself in order to protect these kids and let these kids get away, because had she not done that, he would have gotten them. The good news is she didn't die. The bad news is she's got some recovery work to do. So you can always Google her name. There is a GoFundMe page for her as well. Can you drop the screen? So these are big altruistic experiences, but I think that there's also a million small altruistic actions that we can take that have an effect on each other and have an effect on the world, even if we don't think that they're huge, big things. Remember that one of the things that Scott Peck said was that love is a choice. It's not I mean, yeah, it's a feeling, and we fall in love, and it's all that. But he said love is a choice, and when we truly love, we extend ourselves for another's spiritual growth. So there's that extension. Again, we're back to that giving. So if we could see this video, this is the concept of paying it forward. And I thought I could tell you the story, but sometimes for me, I like to see the face of the person, and I like to see the place. And this is a very simple story, you know, about donuts and coffee, but it makes the point.
This whole thing started with me going through the drive-thru on a very random Friday. I had lost my job, so I was devastated, like devastated with a capital D. And I went through the drive-thru at Heavenly Donuts to get a cup of coffee for me and my daughter. And the person in front of me, unbeknownst to me, when I pulled up, had paid for my order. It was just this single act of random kindness, didn't save the world, didn't change, you know, it just was so unexpected and so kind that it made all the difference to me. That I said, okay, you know what, I'm gonna do this. I am gonna do this for the next person that is behind me, because it was so nice. And there was no one behind me. So the next day I went back to Heavenly Donuts because I had made this promise. And it was, you know, I make promises all the time, but this was a big one. And so I went back, and there was someone behind me, and I said, I'm gonna pay for them. And it was like $12. So when I went through, they were going nuts. They were going crazy. They said, you won't believe what happened. You went through, and then 55 people had gone through after me and just kept it going. They just kept paying for everybody, and everybody else kept paying for everybody. And the affect of the whole place was genuine, and it was nice, and it was happy, and it was really great. I would say the most important thing that I took away from this is that you have no idea what a person is going through. You have no idea what their story is. You don't know what they're bringing to the plate, and you don't know what a simple act of kindness will do to make a difference. And it might be just a $2.50 cup of coffee.
And to hear her tell it, you could just, you know, see her tearing up. And what's the big deal? It's just a cup of coffee and a donut. It's not like I stood in front of bullets, you know, before a shooter. But the effect that it had on the community and the effect that it had on everybody who participated in it was you could see this loving kindness that was just being spread around this little town over coffee and donuts. Jesus said it this way. He said, when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So he says, you know, we have a couple of ways of giving. We also have a couple ways of serving. We can serve, and it's like, hello, did you see me serve? Did you see it? Or we can serve as an act of worship. We can serve as selfless service. We can give and say, hey, everybody, did you see what I gave? Or we can give in secret. And what I saw happening at the donut shop is they were giving in secret, because they never knew each other, right? They never knew who was the one who paid. And it spread and it blessed in countless ways. So this month we honor and call forth the altruist that's within each one of us. May we pay it forward in big ways and in small. May we seek ways to serve, to love one another, because this is how we behold the Christ. This is how we call out the divine in each one of us. And if you find yourself slipping into the martyrism, ask yourself, how willing am I to receive in this moment? So may we all be agents of good. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love, for it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we're pardoned. And it is dying to the self that we are born to eternal life. Amen.